Steve here. It's Tuesday, March 17th, 2026. The S&P is holding at 6,740. Now, every single one of us watches inflation like a hawk, but very few know where that battle really began. And let me tell you, it wasn't in some corporate boardroom. It was in the jungles of Vietnam. So today, we're going to dig into how financing that war created a trap, the guns, butter, and gold trap, that completely severed our money from reality and, well, it set the stage for the very market we trade in today.
$1.5 trillion. Take a second to let that sink in. That's what the Vietnam War cost, adjusted for inflation. It's a huge number. But the real story, the one that truly affects you and me, isn't just the price tag. It's how they paid for it. Because the decision that was made back in Washington didn't just fund a conflict. Oh no. It fundamentally changed the nature of money itself. Forever.
All right, so our story really kicks off in the mid-1960s. You've got President Lyndon B. Johnson in the White House, and he's staring down a choice that is going to define the next 50 years of global economics. On one side, he's got a war against communism. On the other, he has his massive Great Society programs at home. This was the ultimate guns and butter problem, and it was a president's gamble with the world's reserve currency.
And here you can see the conflict laid bare. On the one side, you've got guns, the constantly escalating costs of the war, and on the other, butter, just enormous social spending for the Great Society. Now, his advisors, they were crystal clear. You have to choose. You can't do both. The country can't afford it. But Johnson, he flat out refused. He truly believed America could have it all, and he was going to do it without raising taxes, which he saw as political suicide.
So, how do you possibly pay for two enormous competing projects without asking the public to open their wallets? The answer was as simple as it was destructive. You don't ask. You just create the money. You just print it. To sidestep the political backlash, the Johnson administration borrowed, and it let those printing presses run red hot. And right there, that was the beginning of an inflationary spiral that would plague the American economy for years to come.
By the late 60s, the rest of the world, well, they were starting to catch on. The U.S. was just flooding the entire globe with paper dollars to pay for this war, and our allies were starting to get uneasy. They began to seriously question if these pieces of paper were actually worth what we claimed they were. You could feel it. The world was getting ready to call our bluff.
Now, to really get the crisis, you have to remember the rules of the game back then. It was called the Bretton Woods system. It was set up right after World War II, and it made the U.S. dollar the king of all currencies, but with one critical ironclad promise. Any foreign country could trade their dollars back to us for our gold at a fixed price. The dollar was supposed to be literally as good as gold. This was the bedrock of the entire post-war financial world. But countries, especially France, they took a hard look at our books. They weren't fools. They saw the U.S. printing money like there was no tomorrow to fund a war. And they did the simple math. They realized we were printing way more dollars than we had gold in the vaults to back them up. So what did they do? They started sending ships loaded to the brim with U.S. dollars, and they demanded our physical gold in return. It was a classic run on the bank, but this time it was on a global scale, a global margin call in America itself. And this chart, it shows you exactly what happened. Just look at that drain. Between 1965 and 1971, our gold reserves absolutely plummeted. We're talking about physical bars of gold being loaded onto planes and ships, leaving the vaults at Fort Knox for good. The promise was being broken, right in front of everyone. And believe me, Washington was in a flat-out panic. The whole system was about to shatter into a million pieces. This gold drain couldn't go on. It was completely unsustainable. The United States was literally bleeding out its reserves. A decision had to be made, and it finally came on a quiet Sunday evening in the summer of 1971. This event would become known as the Nixon Shock, the day the rules of money changed for everyone forever. You can see the acceleration on this timeline. The massive spending kicks off in 65. By 68, the gold drain is getting serious. And then, the breaking point, August 15th, 1971. President Richard Nixon goes on national television and, with one speech, unilaterally changes the rules of the entire global financial game.
So what did he do? He announced that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold. Period. He simply closed the gold window. Just like that, in one televised address, the Bretton Woods system, which had been the financial law of the land for almost 30 years, was dead.
And with that move, the dollar's last anchor to a physical, tangible asset was severed. It was now floating, adrift. This was the real endgame. It allowed the government to keep printing money to fund the war, now without the discipline, without the restriction of a gold standard. The printing presses were now truly, completely unleashed. But this newfound freedom, well, it came at a terrible cost.
So, why does any of this history matter to us now, on March 17, 2026? Because the world we're living in, the market we're trading in, was born from that crisis. We are all living in the era of the Nixon shock.
And this is the system we all know, fiat currency. Money that is no longer backed by a commodity like gold, but only by the full faith and credit of the government that issues it. In reality, it's money backed by a promise, and our collective belief that the promise won't be broken. Every dollar you earn, save, or trade, it's a piece of this grand ongoing experiment.
And what was the immediate result of cutting the dollar loose? Well, it was the 1970s, an economic nightmare they called stagflation. Think about this. Prices were skyrocketing, but the economy was stagnant. You had high inflation and high unemployment at the same time. The stock market went absolutely nowhere for an entire decade. It was the bill coming due for the decisions of the 60s.
Let's be perfectly clear. The Vietnam War was the catalyst. It was the immense financial pressure that finally shattered the old system of sound money and forced us into this modern world of infinite liquidity. The lesson was brutal, and it was simple. You cannot fund both guns and butter with printed money forever without eventually destroying the currency itself.
So when you look at your screens today, I want you to remember this history. This constant battle we fight against inflation. The very reason the Federal Reserve is so powerful, it all traces back to this story. That's why you watch the CPI report so closely, because it is the deep, permanent scar that the financing of the Vietnam War left on our market.
You know, the Nixon shock, it was sold to the American people as a temporary measure, just a fix for a crisis. Well, here we are, more than 50 years later, and it's the permanent foundation of our entire financial world. A system that has a built-in, ever-present temptation to just print our way out of any problem. So the question for every single one of us in the market is this: are we still paying the price for that decision made on a Sunday night in 1971? This is Steve. I'll see you at the Open.